Hi there. Welcome, everybody. My name is Bonnie Violet, and in case you don't know where you are at Dragon Spirituality. This is our 7th episode tonight. Our guest will be Peaches Christ. Peaches Christ is a filmmaker and cult leader living in San Francisco. Her infamous movie events are self-produced at the Castro Theater and regularly draw over 1,000 attendees to each new production before they tour. Events have featured special guest stars John Waters, Cloris Leachman, Bruce Campbell, Barry Bostwick, Pam Grier, Elvira, and more. Peaches is the alter ego of Joshua Grinnell, the writer and director of the feature film All About Evil. The award-winning dark comedy gore film stars Natasha Lyon, Thomas Dekker, Cassandra Peterson, Mink Stoll, and Peaches Christ herself. Peaches Christ has been featured in the films Milk, I Am Divine, Diary of a Teenage Girl, Mansfield 6667, Scream Queen, My Nightmare on Elm Street, You Don't Know Me, and more. This is Peaches Christ. Hi, Peaches.
Hi.
How's it going?
Oh, I'm doing well, hanging in there. How are you?
I'm doing well as well. That was a great video. Thanks for sharing it with us. Would you like to tell us a little bit more about it?
Sure. It's, it was a trailer for the Frameline Film Festival. Every year they commission someone to do a new trailer for the festival. And then the trailer runs before like every movie they screen. So it runs hundreds of times at the Castro Theater and the Roxy and theaters in the East Bay. And I have been a huge fan and supporter of the Frameline Film Festival since I moved here to San Francisco. And so when they asked me to do it, I was like, oh my God, it's gotta be great. So, I worked my ass off on writing and directing and then performing in that trailer. And it was one of those things where no one had done a Wizard of Oz parody, so I decided that would be the best way to celebrate queer film.
Yeah, no, definitely. It's fantastic. And you did it all.
Thank you. Yeah. I mean, I got to throw water in Heclina's face repeatedly.
I saw that.
The whole thing was, I didn't get paid to make that trailer, but that moment was payment enough.
Definitely payment enough. I want to say thank you for being here tonight. I guess one of the things that we'll do just to get started is kind of, I like to start off with Little Peaches or Life Before Peaches. I'm curious to know tell us a little bit about kind of where you grew up and how it was growing up.
So I grew up in Annapolis, Maryland. And Annapolis is sort of in between DC and Baltimore. And it's where the Naval Academy is located, so it's historic. It's boring, if you ask me. As a kid, I love it now. I love going back and visiting and it feels like home. But of course, as a kid growing up who wanted to be I wanted to live in New York City, I wanted to be where the excitement was. Annapolis was not that. And I grew up in the suburbs of Annapolis. So in a suburban neighborhood, and went to Catholic school and, grew up going to church. And, as a kid, before discovering drag even, I was always, in many ways, the weirdo that I am today. I was a kid who was unapologetically into horror movies and anything spooky. I was obsessed with Elvira. I was a weirdo kid. And definitely a black sheep, but also a kind of a go-getter. So, I would put on haunted houses in the neighborhood. I used to write and direct and audition kids to be in these haunted, attractions. And I would write and direct little plays. And then, I was in children's theater workshops and stuff like that. So, pre-drag Peaches was, I was such a weirdo that I would get my parents to buy me as much horror makeup and Halloween makeup as I could convince them to buy. And then I would hoard it. And year round, I would put myself in makeup and costumes and, dress up in the summertime. And, so, I was kind of always a little drag queen.
Always. Yeah. So when did that start for you? What age?
I mean, as young as I can remember, because when I was a kid, so in Annapolis, we lived there full time basically. And in the summers, we had a place at the beach. And so we would go down to Ocean City, Maryland, which is a very like traditional East Coast beach resort town. And I was obsessed with Ocean City. I loved going down to the ocean. And I felt like, in fact, I wanted to be there as much as I could. And so at some point, my parents actually let me stay there for the entire summer. I would spend half the summer with my grandparents and half with my parents. But part of my obsession was over the haunted houses that were there. And from a young age, like 7, 8, 9 years old, I would go down and sit and stare at this haunted house called Morbid Manor and just watch it, and then watch all and so like the kids, the teenagers that worked there knew who I was. And I would get caught like dressing up and then buying a ticket and like hiding in the haunted attractions and scaring people. So this is, like very young age, like really young. Before I was 10, I was doing this shit.
Too old for them to hire you, huh?
Right, exactly. Too young.
Too young, yeah, sorry. Yeah. So you had said that you went to Catholic school. How was that for you?
Well, growing up, I loved a lot of what it was all about. I loved the sort of all the sort of drag of it, I loved the vestments and the sort of the pageantry of nuns and priests. And, as a kid, of course I bought into it. I was brainwashed because I was brought up in this environment. And so I believed it all. I literally believed, as a kid that I was eating the body of Jesus, that they had turned this wafer into the flesh of Jesus Christ and that I was drinking his blood. Think about how that's what they believe, and I bought into it until, I was around in 6th, 7th, 8th grade. I started to ask questions, and that wasn't always like encouraged at my Catholic school, right? So one of the big sacraments is confirmation. When you're in 8th grade, confirmation is this Catholic sacrament where, basically most Catholic kids just do it because their parents tell them to. And you're confirming that you're going to be like an adult member of the Catholic Church. But me being the questioning sort of, I guess, drama queen that I am, and also just really, asking questions, decided that I wasn't sure I wanted to be Catholic. So therefore, how could I be confirmed? And that created a big controversy with Sister Marta, the teacher at the time. And I did not get confirmed. And my parents supported that. But, that's where things kind of turned shitty, because it's where the veil of flawlessness started to like drop away from the Catholic Church. And it's where, for me, as a kid going to Catholic school, I really started to question everything. So all through high school, I was a bit of a rebel when it came to the religious stuff.
Gotcha. So you still went to the school and graduated from there? Yeah,
that's where I graduated from St. Mary's High School in Annapolis, Maryland. And, I had lots of great friends, and, and some of that was a great education, but, a lot of it, especially the religious hypocrisy, really drove me nuts, so I was, constantly calling out things, it was an upper middle class private school. So there were a lot of Heathers, a lot of jock, assholes. And then I was kind of an asshole, I was kind of a goth, pissed off, closeted queer kid who, in many ways, was fine with bullying the popular kids, outsmarting them or, being mean to them, and, having a group of friends, a large group of sort of alternative friends who were the drama queers. I look back on it now and I'm like, oh, I was kind of a jerk too. It wasn't just them, I actually used them in many ways to sort of, exercise revenge.
Justify the behavior a little.
Yes, for sure.
We all were jerks when we were young.
Yeah.
And so after you graduated, what was next?
Then I went to college, and I thought I was going to go to New York at that time, but I just could not afford NYU. My father actually is a CPA. He's retired now, but at the time, he sat down and showed me what my student loans would look like if I went to NYU to study film production. So I ended up getting into Penn State, which was my backup school, and they had a film program at Penn State where I could actually shoot on film and edit film and use flatbeds and make a 16 millimeter, film. And so that was really important to me. So I ended up going to Penn State, which was completely the opposite of what I thought I wanted. But in fact, it ended up being a great thing for me because I was able to be a much bigger fish there where there weren't very many openly queer film students. Actually, I was the only one, and there was no drag scene. So we kind of made it up, and had house parties. And I started doing drag when I was in college, and I made kind of outrageous, short films, and I think if I'd gone to NYU, I would have been maybe one of her, like just another queen making a crazy movie or whatever.
Right. We do have a question from the audience. Gerard Brule was asking, what inspires you to keep going during those times? Like when you tell people who you are and they're scared, what kind of...
I've always kind of, I guess, felt like I've thrived through adversity. And I'm even kind of trying to now apply that to this new situation we're all in, where I'm like, oh my God, my whole life is theater and performing and this and that. And it's all been taken away. And it's like, what can we do? And how can we be creative? And I guess in a way, I haven't known what it's like to not have, that kind of adversity. So, I mean, in a way, I think there's ways to use it, to your advantage. And so when people, are shitty, maybe there's I don't know. I mean, it's just natural in a way for, I think, a lot of us as queer people to take what once hurt us. I mean, that's what drag is in a way, right? Something that once hurt us. Like, you're not supposed to be like a girl, right. You don't be a sissy. Well, look at me now,
I'll show you. You want to see sissy? I'll show you sissy.
Right.
And so, when did Peaches come about when you were in college, or?
Yes. So I was actually making my senior thesis film, Jizz Mopper, and Jizz Mopper had a character in it who was a drag character. And I was directing the movie, and I'd co-written the movie with my friend Hal. And the character of this drag character in the movie wasn't supposed to be Peaches. It was actually supposed to be performed by a Latino man who was playing this character, Coco Nevada. And when my friend just wasn't showing up to play the role, and I was getting in trouble in film class, there weren't many people to step in. Like, nobody wanted to play a drag queen, in central Pennsylvania at that time. Like, drag was just, taboo. And so I ended up stepping in to play the part, which, I make it sound like, I saved the day. But in retrospect now, I'm like, I bet I had eyes on playing that, part the whole time, So I ended up being the character, and we changed the character's name to Peaches. And then I wanted to call the character Peaches Christ. But the cinematographer, my friend Eric, who was very, very Christian, begged me not to do it because he was like, oh my God, my parents are already dying. I'm shooting in a porno store. Like, please, for the love of God, do not call yourself Peaches Christ. So in the movie Jizz Mopper, my drag name is Peaches Nevada. And then, of course, when I got on that plane to San Francisco, the paperwork was filed, and
right.
Peaches Christ was born.
The official name change took into effect. And so the universe was like, here you go, do drag. And so how was your first drag experience? How was that for you?
Well, it's awkward. And, I think, I was a booger. And I think all great drag queens start as little baby boogers. And, you're learning and you're experimenting and you're trying different things. And, I think that especially back then, there was no book on how to do drag. There was no sort of There was no internet. There was drag just wasn't very popular. So, my introduction to drag was through the discovery of John Waters and Divine. Growing up in Maryland, discovering Divine really changed my life. So clearly, I've been influenced a lot by John Waters and Divine, and that inspiration is enormous, as well as the Rocky Horror Picture Show. So my sort of entrance into drag, or even my knowledge of drag, all came from those movies, the Divine movies and Frankenfurter. And so, my earliest drag is me in front of a camera, in front of a 16 millimeter camera. And it's forever, now caught on film in this movie Jizz Mopper. And of course, I look at that movie now and I cringe and think it's, unwatchable. And, and very few people have seen it, because I've kept it very close.
Where can we watch it?
You can't.
Can't watch it.
But I actually think that that's going to change very soon. I mean, especially during like a global pandemic, and the older you get, and, the less I take, myself seriously, the more I don't care about any of that stuff anymore. And I actually look back on all of that stuff and really, really enjoy it. So I think we'll put it online soon. Part of it's that I don't actually solely own it myself. It was a student thesis film, and 4 of us graduated and 4 of us paid for it. So we actually share ownership over it. And so part of my reluctance to do anything with the movie is that one of those members from our film school, I don't know where she is. I need to find her, and I have not been able to track her down, because I'd like for the 4 of us to be able to like present it together, versus me just putting it out there. Because really it's 4 different people's movie. It's not just mine.
Yeah, it'd be great to do like a Q&A with y'all.
Yeah, I think people, I really, the movie itself, I'm actually quite proud of. When it came out at Penn State, it played in the film festival and it won the audience award for best film. So, we made a good movie. It's just that Peaches in it, some of my looks, and I know what, some drag queen at home is saying, well, she still, looks shitty. But, I'm telling you, some of these looks, woo! We are talking woof,
Right. Like you said, we got to start somewhere.
Yeah.
So right after that, you moved out to San Francisco?
I did. I basically graduated from Penn State, and I had met John Waters while I was at Penn State. And John had actually told me and my friend Martini about the Coquettes. And I just couldn't believe that there was this hippie group of drag performers that Divine and Mink Stoll and John all were friends with and performed with, that lived in San Francisco in the late 60s, early 70s, who did drag shows before movies, in a movie theater, and that they made short films. This blew my mind. I knew about Andy Warhol and the Factory Girls and all of that, but I had not heard of the Coquettes. It was before the documentary came out. And John also told me about Canyon Cinema and the Kuchar brothers and the underground film scene that existed here. So Martini and I, my old sidekick, Martini, she and I, we were actually very close friends, Michael and I, and we bought, seriously, like one-way plane tickets. So we had no job, no place to live. I don't know what we were thinking, and we literally got on a plane with one-way plane tickets and moved to San Francisco and got here and just kind of we had no money. We thought we had money because we had graduation money. But when I look on it now, I'm like, we had no money. We had a couple weeks worth of SRO hotel. We lived in a SRO hotel room until we could get on our feet.
Right. Isn't that how all of us get to San Francisco?
I think it is. That's why when, young people reach out to me now, I'm like, I would not recommend it. But here's what I did, and you're young and you're resilient. So the best thing you can do is just get here and figure it out.
Yeah. I think if your goal is just to live in San Francisco, I moved out here 3 years ago, and that was my goal, was just to live here. So where I lived, what job I took, all that stuff didn't matter. It was I just want to live here, so I'll do whatever.
You moved here at the height of it. It's seeming impossible because, honey, when I moved here, you could, we were working, coffee shop jobs. And, I was, assistant manager of an art house movie theater. And not only could we pay the rent, we could pay the rent and then some, and then, spend money on drag, because none of us were making money doing drag. So those days are so long gone. I mean, when I moved here, Heclina was working at like Tower Video and at the Stud Bar, when she started, Tranny Shack and everything. It's like all that time I realized we thought we had it hard. And then I look at the way you guys have it now, and I'm like, oh my God, I don't know how they do it, working 5 jobs and, paying outrageous rent and sharing bedrooms,
Yeah, it's pretty, it's not like anything I've ever lived before, but I'm so glad I landed here.
Good. That's good.
So I guess, so then you met up with Heclina, and was Heclina doing drag at that time as well, or?
Unfortunately, yes. So she had already been performing as Heclina for a while. In fact, a friend of ours who had moved here from Penn State the year before was sending us like the gay rags from the Castro. And, there was one called Odyssey at the time, and they were sending us Odyssey magazines. And so we would get these magazines, and this club, nightclub Tranny Shack had popped up in the Odyssey magazine. And I remember seeing Heclina's face and Pippi Lovestocking's face in this cheap little ad. And it said like $1 beer, $5 cover, drag show at midnight, new nightclub. And they started that nightclub in like March. And Martini and I and our other friend Selma Goods got here in May. And so we started going to the Stud every Tuesday night at midnight. And back then, the word Tranny Shack was really an inclusive term. Like that club was where everyone went, all the weirdos, I mean, there were transvestite, straight men with their wives, at that club, trans women, non-binary folks, drag performers, like it was sort of the, it was the alternative, strange place to go. I mean, it would fill up on a Tuesday night at midnight, and so that's where I met all of my friends and creative, collaborators, and, got so much inspiration from watching, these punk rock, insane, performers do their thing.
Right. And so how did I know you mentioned you wanted Peaches Christ. Do you want to tell us a little bit why you chose that name?
Yeah, I mean, I carried that Catholic anger, with me through young adulthood. And, I think that part of me did feel like, a little betrayed by this church that had, at one time been this thing that was part of my life. And, I'd gone to this school, and then to learn that, this religion is teaching that people like me were sinners. And, and the hypocrisy of it all, because I knew, what these priests were and, what a lot of the nuns were. And I remember a nun keeping me after class once and her berating me because she said I had too many friends that were girls and I was never going to be a normal man. I remember her, really laying into me after class once. And it was super homophobic. I mean, it wasn't even veiled. It was like, you're gay and you need to be more normal and stop hanging out with all these girlfriends of yours because you're acting like a girl, and cut it out. I mean, basically that's what she said. And I don't know, I always knew it was wrong. Like, luckily I always knew they were wrong. And so I carried a lot of anger at the hurt they had caused me. And so in a way, making light of the name Christ for me was about kind of turning that pain into something else. I also loved that it was gothic and gory. I mean, images of Christ are really horrific. And I liked sort of the religious iconography of it all. And then, of course, I created a show called Midnight Mass. Mm-hmm. So it all kind of tied together. And I loved the idea of being sort of a cult leader, or, I still love the ideas of cults and religion and, stuff like that, but as entertainment.
Yeah. So it was just kind of like reclaiming all that.
For me, it was, it really was. And I remember when, we first did Midnight Mass at the Bridge Theater back in 1998. And the League of Catholic Voters actually sent the company Landmark Theaters, who was the cinema that was allowing us to do the show, they sent them a boycott letter, a threat, and Landmark sat me down and they said, just so you know, you've been threatened with these protests and we as a company need to make a decision. But what was so cool about Landmark, and I remember the guy that actually gave me the green light, he wore a suit, and I was young. I was like 23. I was so nervous that they were going to pull the plug on this show that I wanted. But they said, we built this company screening movies like Eraserhead and Pink Flamingos, and it would be hypocritical of us as an art house, an independent cinema, not to let you do this thing. But they wanted me to know that they were taking a risk. And sure enough, we had protesters that first week or two. And then ever since then, I've barely been protested. And I really miss it. I loved it. I loved that I was pissing off Catholics.
That's what it's all about, right?
I did. I loved it. I still stand by it. So, I don't want to piss off people that I'm, groups of people that I'm not a part of, but this was a group of people I was a part of. So I didn't, it didn't bother me that they were pissed off.
Yeah, I feel like a lot of queer folks have had that experience in like spiritual spaces where they maybe once loved it, felt really great, and then all of a sudden it like turned against us in some way.
Yeah, it's very painful. I think, and I have a lot of friends who've grown up Mormon and a lot of friends who've grown up Baptist. And, and I think that these, there are differences, of course, and especially what's interesting is the differences in coming out, and sort of that's where the Catholic hypocrisy really drives me nuts because, I had many friends. In fact, my first ever boyfriend who was disowned after being sent to conversion therapy, So this is not, there was a lot of abuse going on, in the name of Christ and the church.
Gotcha. And so do you have any sort of spiritual, do you identify as a spiritual person now or?
Well, I do. And it's funny because it took me a while to get there. So I think part of becoming Peaches Christ and doing midnight mass and at the time was sort of this idea. I think in my mind, I was a reluctant atheist. It was the easiest way for me to sort of justify, what I was doing was to sort of say like, it's all bullshit, and I'm a fucking atheist and fuck you. And, I was very, very angry. And, a lot of the work was, like a lot of my entertainment was about being caustic and outrageous and stuff. But then I would find myself sort of like having spiritual moments, and it was very confusing to me because it took me a while, I'll say, to unwrap and unravel and untangle my Catholic upbringing from my spirituality. And so luckily, after some years, and it was kind of my Saturn returns period where, I was in my later 20s and I sort of was like, oh, you know what? I miss being spiritual. I want a spiritual practice and I want to be spiritual. But I've got to separate this idea of religion and my Catholic upbringing with spirituality. And I'll tell you, that was not like that took me a while. And I won't, I became part of a fellowship of people who were able to create a God of their own understanding. And this fellowship's, not religious. And so that's where I found I could express my spiritual side more comfortably.
Yeah. That's a lot of the reason why I want to do this work is I feel like, a spirit is a part of all of us. And I think that there's care that can be taken with that. And I feel like for so many of us, we've been told we don't have one. It's like we don't have access to some sort of higher power concept or God. And that's just not true. We can experience life. For me, it hasn't, like there was a time when I was experiencing that. It wasn't the truth, but it was, I didn't see that I could, have spirituality anymore. And it was so damaging.
I agree. Yeah, I agree. And in many ways, I sort of participated in that sort of, it was almost like I'm a fucking punk queer, And somehow in my mind, and it's again, it goes back to the bullshit of the way I was raised. It sadly meant that I had to throw out spirituality. And what I realized is, no, I had to throw out the religion. I had to throw out the doctrine, but I could hang on to the spirituality. And that takes time to figure that out when you've been, abused by a church that, is gotten in your head.
Yeah, definitely. And I feel like identities for me have over time, like identities can be really limiting, especially if it decides everything for you. Like you say you identify as a gay man, or you identify as a Christian, or you identify this way, it almost kind of makes all your choices for you. It can.
Right, of course.
But I think as I've gotten older, I can define what a trans person who is spiritual, who does drag, who like whatever is like, I get to be all of that at once. And like identities can almost be a little limiting.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, I think that's, and especially, I mean, it kind of was the beauty of that community when I first fell into it in San Francisco was like, in many ways, we didn't have the language that we do now. And in some ways, I feel like there was an easier acceptance. There was this sort of like shared experience that so many of us had had. And I think it was also that like, no matter why we were being bullied or getting beaten up in the streets, it was coming from the same place. And I mean, I'm really, really glad for progress. And, the fact that gay people can be married now, and that, trans folks, when we were talking before the show, I have a trans friend who's a little kid, he's 11 years old and he's been able to identify as trans since he could speak. This is amazing. This is incredible. On the other hand, I do think I benefited a little bit from getting to be part of a community, a smaller community, where just the audacity of coming out of the closet or dressing in drag or identifying as trans in any shape, way, or form, and that could just be through, gender expression, where we were, there was a time where we all had to stick together. Like all of us were, kind of in the same boat, and we sort of all, lived under the same roof. And I kind of, I sometimes miss those days, but, I just sound like an old person.
Well, right. Yeah. I mean, there's like that sense of urgency. There's like that feeling that we need one another, that we're connected to one another, that can kind of go away when we feel, I don't know, when those things go away. I
mean, there was a time in the 80s where being openly queer, like it was just cool. It's not necessarily, cool anymore. I mean, you could be as square as anything and, still be gay. I mean, God, we have conservative gays now. It's so tired. I mean, we have, conservative trans people, we've got Caitlyn Jenner to deal with, so it's like that thing where, we're now so far along that we have to deal with the assholes in our own community, which is good. It's ultimately good. But, there was a time where, it felt like we were, this little more renegade, I guess, punk group of gender outlaws and outcasts.
Yeah, for sure. We have a question from the audience. What advice would you give to people who are thinking about drag, and words of wisdom to those who are already doing drag?
Well, I mean, obviously, like a lot has changed since I first started doing drag. Now there's a very successful and popular television franchise, all over the world, where whether we like it or not, it has had a tremendous impact on drag around the world. And so I would say one thing which is sad to me, but kind of maybe need to decide, like, how important is it to you that you go that route? Because it's a very specific thing, getting on that TV show and becoming famous through Drag Race. My suggestion to you would be that not be your goal. That may or may not happen, and that's fine. And to find the thing about drag that you love and the thing that you're good at, and pursue it, and make it work for you. And then if someday, because let's face it, they're gonna run out of types of queens. You're this original, crazy, weird, wild thing of your own making, and you get on that TV show, great. But if you don't, who cares, and you're better off, just doing it your way and kind of building a, we didn't even call it a career back then. We called it building a character, building a, I don't know. It wasn't a career. So I would also suggest maybe not even doing it at first because you think you're going to, have a career in it. Do it as a hobby and as a passion because you love it. And if you don't love it enough to do it and not make money off of it, I don't think it's worth it.
Yeah, I feel the same way. So what would you say your favorite thing is about like drag? You do so many different, like you do shows, you do haunted houses, you do all these sorts of things. Do you have a favorite thing?
As far as the medium goes, I would say that I don't. I loved making All About Evil, which is the feature film I made. I loved making the short films. I loved doing the stage shows and performing on stage. I loved performing, at the Stud, and I love doing the haunted attraction. And so for me, a lot of it comes from the same place, and I give it sort of the same energy. And I guess what I love about all those things is I love that drag has allowed me to express this part of myself that's like that's deep down inside, that I think the more introverted, part of me wouldn't have allowed come out if I didn't sort of have this channel of fabulosity, of confidence that Peaches ended up giving me. So I think for me, drag was a real way for me to reclaim and to celebrate and kind of manifest this creature that was, hiding deep inside me. And I worry that like, if I hadn't found Peaches or drag, I don't know that I wouldn't have I don't know. I mean, I'm often quite introverted, believe it or not, outside of, being Peaches. So yeah, my favorite part of drag is just sort of what it's unlocked for me,
Mm-hmm. How has Shelter in Place been for you and your drag?
I think like everybody else, it's been hard. It's been challenging. I hate kind of talking about it being hard because it's like, yeah, everyone, it sucks for everyone. I definitely feel like I'm super sick of it now, like, really hitting a wall with it. I want to be out doing stuff and like seeing people and creating things. I mean, I was saying to you as well that I went and did the Meals on Heels dinner for Oasis, where I delivered food to people, and it was socially distanced, of course, and I could perform a little number. And what I didn't expect was how much I was going to love it. I loved it, and what I loved about it was that people were excited to see me, like to see Peaches in person, and like their excitement and their love for me showing up at their house or whatever. It totally filled me with love, as cheesy as it sounds, and it was a really amazing experience. And these Zoom experiences and the internet are wonderful, amazing, but it doesn't replace energy. It doesn't replace that in-person experience. So I think for the most part, that's what I miss the most, is sort of, being with people in person, being with audiences in person. And it's been the hardest part because that's what I was doing, to pay the bills. So not only did sort of my livelihood stop, but then also, the thing that I enjoy most. I'm lucky. I enjoy working.
Right. I think a lot of people have realized they maybe took for granted like touch and like connectedness and being in a moment where we have to be separate. It's so weird how we're like so separate, but I've also never felt so connected like to so many people because we're like going through the same experience kind of.
Like globally, like it's so wild to realize like what we're dealing with here. I have friends in other countries around the world who are experiencing all the same anxiety and the same shit. It is wild. I mean, for better or worse. I do think that I do believe, and I really believe this, that we're going to get to the other side of this and it's going to be better. And that all the protesting and all of the everything that's happened, with this perfect storm of COVID and shelter in place and George Floyd and, everything, all of it, that there's a no turning back point, and we've reached it, and the chickens have come home to roost. And so the other side of this, I just know is going to be better, but we just have to kind of like keep up with the work and like stick with it. And, definitely, change things come, November with the election. But I think that we're going to be in this storm for a few years, unfortunately. But I do believe that the other side of it's going to be a much more beautiful world.
Yeah, really great change and growth starts with a little bit of discomfort often.
Yeah, or a lot.
Right. This question is from Reverend Marvin White. And he said, you mentioned Divine. Who are your other drag saints and drag sisters, those drag queens who have gone before? Okay.
Well, Divine for sure, obviously. Elvira, who I adore. I grew up, worshiping Elvira. I also, from a young age, being just such a queen, was lucky enough to be introduced to Hollywood movies. So I grew up, really even in college, like worshiping Joan Crawford and Rita Hayworth and Betty Davis and, Judy Garland and like all of the classics. And as far as drag specific icons, I mean, the Coquettes, Hibiscus, certainly San Francisco's very own Doris Fish and Miss X. Like I discovered the movie Vegas in Space, which was shot here in San Francisco, and all those wild queens, that came before me, Tippy and all of the queens in Vegas in Space, like they've really been humongous influences and inspiration for me.
Fantastic. Another question from Jeff O. He's curious about the Satanic Temple and how it's understood or misunderstood. I know we haven't quite gone there yet, but.
Well, I mean, I there's actually this great documentary that I think, really does it justice. It's called Hail Satan, ? Hail Satan, I guess is the way you would say the title of the film. And I think the film is actually brilliant. And I think for me, what I love about being a member of the Satanic Temple is that, Satanism has always been something that I've been drawn to as a taboo, because it was so in the 80s was such a terrifying thing and used to terrify people, and actually used to do really horrible things like throw innocent teenagers in jail, just because they listened to Metallica or whatever. So it was used as such an awful thing. But the discovery of like Anton LaVey for me, and sort of, the history of Satanism in San Francisco specifically was always really exciting. But it wasn't until the Satanic Temple came along specifically that I really thought, oh, I could become part of this group, because it's really performative religion. And what they do, and I think, what we do is we sort of challenge the separation of church and state through being a religion. So, we, as the Satanic Temple, really work hard to maintain choice across the country, and make sure that all of these abortion challenges are challenged right back. The Satanic Temple does a lot as far as taking things to court and winning lawsuits. Like anytime some asshole wants to put the fucking, 10 commandments on public property, the Satanic Temple's there to say, well, then we'll put up our statue of Baphomet.
Right.
So it's more of a political performative thing, I think, than a religion. But if you look up the tenets, because it is a religion, if you look up the tenets of the Satanic Temple, I think you'll find that most of us probably want to live that life.
Right. Yeah. What would you say is one of the biggest misconceptions?
Oh, I think, that we're evil, or that we celebrate wickedness or darkness or cruelty, or, it's actually kind of, I think, the opposite, I think if you look at, evangelical Christians and radical Christianity, I mean, keep in mind, I obviously have a lot of Christian relatives and Christian family members. And, so I know that not all Christians are bad people, and just because I left the Catholic Church or I resent it doesn't mean that I think that the members are necessarily a problem, but when you look at sort of the extremes of any religion, really, it can get, just so terrifying.
Right.
So I think with the Satanic Temple, it's really about it's basically holding a mirror up to those things.
Yeah.
You know.
I'm not as familiar. I guess what comes up for me is I really love stories about villains and like they're kind of like how they became villains, so to speak, or that idea of like evil and good. Like I love like the show Lucifer, you know, where it's like the devil dealing with being human or whatever. Like I love those sorts of things because I feel like we all have the ability to be monsters or to be like whatever.
And I think what's interesting about it from a queer point of view and why you see so many queer people drawn to it is because it's where we saw ourselves. You know, growing up, we've often, I mean, look at Disney villains, look at the gayest representations in Disney films. They're usually, you know, villains, right? You know, Scar, very gay acting, Ursula, you know, based on Divine, like, you know, queerness, you know, Anthony Perkins in, you know, Psycho, you know, Buffalo Bill in The Silence of the Lambs. So in a twisted way, those were people I identified with. I actually identified with the monster, you know. So, I mean, I think growing up, there was part of me that felt more comfortable saying I was a Satanist than a Christian, you know. But really, do I worship the devil? No, I don't believe in the devil. You know, and I don't think the Satanic Temple, most of the members actually, there's no real belief in the devil or Satan, you know. It's a belief in, you know, the universe and, you know, standing up for people, standing up for the underdog.
Right. Another question, do you feel that San Francisco still has a more punk, edgy aesthetic? And how do you think the drag scenes are in the cities today? Any notable differences in engagement from Benjamin Joseph?
You know, one of the things that's been like so great about getting to work as Peaches is that I've been able to travel all over and experience drag scenes, you know, in different cities all over the country and then even, you know, in different parts of the world, you know, especially the UK, where I've done a lot of shows and things. And I'll say that I think San Francisco is still quite edgy and does to some degree, still kind of lead the way with breaking down walls and breaking down barriers. And I'm really proud of the young people in this city that are currently performing and creating scenes. And, you know, I got to perform at Oaklash last year, and just, you know, watching the show, I was like, oh yeah, this is still like, I saw stuff in that show that I've never seen before. And I feel like I've really seen it all, you know? Right. So I do think that, but I'll also say that San Francisco and the influence of San Francisco has reached a lot of communities. And, you know, I see things in like the Manchester drag scene in England, you know, with Cheddar Gorgeous and Anaphylactic and all those people, where, you know, I think there's been a lot of inspiration from, you know, what we've done here. And certainly the Boulet brothers have said, you know, that monster drag, you know, was sort of, you know, born in San Francisco, and they've done a lot to give myself and Heclina, Squeaky Blonde, Vinsantos a lot of credit for doing this stuff, you know, 25 years ago, you know, but now the Boulet brothers have kind of brought this sort of style of drag to a bigger platform.
Mainstream.
Yeah. So I still think San Francisco is on the cutting edge, but I also think what's happened is its influence has reached a lot of the world.
Yeah. So we're running on a little bit of a time. So I thought maybe we'll do some rapid fire questions because there are a few that are waiting. One is Larry Swab, I don't know. He says, loved All About Evil. How do we watch it now?
Good question. So we actually self-distributed for a long time and actually did very well with that. And basically had a contract with NBC Universal for North America. I mean, it's actually available. It's more easy to see it in other parts of the world than it is in North America. However, that contract has expired. And so we are now negotiating for it to be on one of the big streaming platforms. And hopefully that'll happen later this year. But I really am upset because COVID, It's kind of prevented this big 10-year anniversary screening from happening that we were going to do in person, here in San Francisco with the cast and at the Victoria Theater and, really, really celebrate it. But obviously that's not going to happen this year. But look for it soon coming to a streaming network near you.
Fantastic. What is your take on the drive-in movie theaters making a comeback during these tricky times we're living in? Exactly.
Well, I love it. I mean, I think it's so cool, and I think it makes sense. My hope is that I'm kind of pushing for creating more of those experiences in the city, more outdoor experiences where maybe you don't have to have a car, but maybe we could have an outdoor cinema, or maybe we could have an outdoor theater or outdoor cabaret space. So that's kind of something I've been actually working on with a company here in San Francisco. So who knows? Because right now, I mean, one of the really tough parts right now is it's very hard to sort of pitch these sorts of projects when our own city is going in the wrong direction. So if we could move in the right direction as far as our phase goes, we might be able to. I have to adjust this thing all the time. We might be able to. We might be able to get there, but right now, God, I guess we just got to be careful. But I think, unfortunately, we're going to be in this mess for a while. Mm-hmm. I hope I'm wrong.
Right. We'll figure out a way to make it fabulous.
We have to. I mean, if it means doing theater outside, we've got to do theater outdoors.
We'll do it. Question: are you still in contact with Mink Stoll? Phyllis Levine says we were friends.
Yes, Mink and I just did a big show on the internet. Where were you, Phyllis? We did a show 2 weeks ago. So Mink and I are very close, which is surreal for me because I grew up, worshiping her. And but she and John have really taken me in, and we've become friends. And I'm so grateful. And Mink is doing really well. She's actually sheltering in place in Los Angeles with her boyfriend. When this all started, Mink and I were supposed to fly to London together the following week in March. We were supposed to do a show in London in March, but Mink smartly, instead of going to London, she got on a plane and went to LA so she could, be with her boyfriend. Otherwise, she would have been stuck in Baltimore alone. So she's doing well.
Do any cities in the South have a solid drag scene? Asked Laura GK.
Oh, yeah. I mean, so many of the southern cities have, vital and huge, incredible drag scenes. Of course, as far as like alternative sort of drag, where I've really found, community, I guess you'd say, Austin, Texas has an incredible scene. Louisiana Purchase and the Poo Poo Platter girls there are incredible. New Orleans is fantastic. Vince Santos and the drag workshop down there, just in tons of fantastic queens. So yeah, all over the South, great queens. Atlanta, of course.
Right. Would you consider performing in Columbus, Ohio?
Yeah, I would perform. Yeah, I would consider performing anywhere.
Right. All right. Yeah. Eric Ferdram II was asking, so maybe.
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of people think that I decide on where I'm going to go or not go. Where a lot of it actually depends on producers, Right. So I have a production company here in San Francisco where we build the shows and create the shows or make the movies. But then when I'm on the road or go other places, it's because a producer in that city has reached out to work with me. So if there's someone in Columbus who wants to either bring me or bring one of my shows, and our shows are not easy to bring. I mean, it's not, it's a challenge, which is why they don't travel maybe to as many places as people would like. But yeah, just reach out to me.
All right. And we'll go ahead and do one last question. It's an end statement. I first discovered Peaches through the Midnight Mass era. Will you ever be doing the Mass series again? James Bradford asks.
Well, I mean, that's actually one of the things I'm kind of, hopeful for with this whole situation we're in. I kind of think maybe I could do something like a Midnight Mass series outside. So that's actually what I've been looking into is could I build, a cinema somewhere? We're looking at actually a roof on a big building. So, I will keep you posted. But the idea would be to do a new version of Midnight Mass, not at midnight.
Right. That's too late for some of us, huh?
It really is.
Yeah. I think this is one more. Let's say, for example, if Stanley Kubrick were around right now, would you ever have him for the Midnight Mass if you were to bring it back?
Oh my God, I would be so scared to have Stanley Kubrick. I'm actually, it's funny. I feel like with a lot of the directors that are auteurs like Stanley Kubrick, as much as I would love to do a show with Stanley Kubrick, and he is a genius, I would actually rather do a show where we screen like The Shining and elevate Shelley Duvall and put her up on a, I tend to do really well with celebrating women and sort of, I feel like a lot of these movies, the men get all of the credit, but I think Shelley Duvall, deserves so much credit for that film. And I'd actually almost rather do a show with her. If I was going to do it, if I was going to do a Stanley Kubrick movie, it would have to be The Shining.
Right. And so if you're okay with the political question, who do you think should be the running mate with Biden?
Oh my God. I mean, like, it's sort of like, who do I think should be the running mate for political reasons? Or who, personally, I would love it if he, would just ask like Auntie Maxine, to get on the ticket. I feel like that, for me, that's something that I would get really excited about. And it's not just identity politics, at the end of the day, but let's face it, it's women of color right now that I actually think, despite identity politics, it's women of color that I think we need more than ever in positions of authority. And if you look at the statistics of the countries that have dealt the best with this global pandemic, the top 7 countries in the world that are doing the best are led by women. So I just want women to take over. Okay. That is identity politics in many ways. Right? So, but my point is, I would love a strong woman of color who has a great track record, to be his running mate. And I think it would be the smartest thing for exciting a lot of us progressives who are feeling a little underwhelmed by our options.
Right. Yes. Well, thank you so much, Peaches. I want to thank you for being on the show tonight. I've had a really great time getting to know you a little bit more.
Thank you, Bonnie. Thanks for having me.
For sure. And I'm just going to say goodbye to the audience as well. Thank you for tuning in with us tonight. Take care and have a good night. Bye-bye.